Good morning. Welcome to Shattering Myths, the program that is for those of you who have come to realize that all of the world's religious, political, economic, and military institutions are corrupt, even counterproductive. I am Yahowah. Our number over the next 2 hours, if you'd like to join us, is 877-300-7645. The White House announced last week that it could not confirm reports that as many as 14 million current and former U.S. government employees had their personal information exposed to hackers. Can you imagine 14 million people on the gravy train that is the U.S. government? That's not local government. That's not county government. That's not state government. For crying out loud, that's the federal government. That's not the military. That's just the bureaucracy of the federal government. There are 14 million people. Now, I don't know if that's the total number or just part of the number. That's just the number whose data was exposed. 14 million? My goodness, are we an upside-down iceberg here? You know, for a government to need 14 million people, to be intrusive in people's lives, to be overall counterproductive, to provide not just so little value, to provide no value. I mean, there's almost no aspect of the federal government that is efficient or beneficial. Almost no aspect of the federal government that couldn't be done vastly cheaper and vastly better in private enterprise. 14 million. And of course, the White House is clueless as it relates to its employees. 4 million people had their identity stolen just the month before? And then following that, 14 million? You know, Obama was heckled the other day. I always like to see idiots like Obama heckled. And, of course, he had started wagging his finger. No, you can't heckle. Now, he heckled his Republican rivals when he was debating against them. So heckling, I guess, goes one way with this man. But he says, you're in my house. And you didn't have any news commentator stand up and says, hey, asshole. Well, they probably wouldn't say asshole. They would probably say, hey, idiot, where's the trust deed on this house? If it's your house, when did you buy it? I don't recall us selling the White House. I guess you can buy it with donations to political campaigns, so you can run smear ads on your opponents and then run all sorts of misleading ads on yourself, as the Abominator did. But it isn't his house. It was also interesting that the guy that painted the Hope poster of Obama, I think it's a really crappy piece of art, but it's the one that's done in multiple colors and has him wearing his Rising Sun badge with Hope written across the bottom and looking up as if he's going to lead the nation into new hope and promise. He was just received a sentence, so I guess he has been indicted and tried and now sentenced to many tens of thousands of dollars worth of fines as a vandal. France, meanwhile, summoned the U.S. ambassador on yesterday, to explain allegations of why the lobby group WikiLeaks has shown that the United States knowingly and deliberately spied on the French president, François Hollande, and other French government leaders. The latest revelations of espionage amongst the Western allies come after it emerged that the U.S. National Spy Agency, the NSA, had spied on Germany, and Germany's own BND intelligence agency had cooperated with the NSA to spy on officials and companies throughout Europe. Oh, isn't that just great? The spies are spying together. And they're not just spying on politicos and not just spying on those suspected of treason or terror. No, they're spying on politicians from countries that are allied with the United States. And they're not just spying on politicians, they're spying on business too. If you ever thought that free enterprise meant free of government, boy, you'd be wrong. You know what really is the difference in a fascist system and a capitalist system whereby the government is doing such things, that it is spying clandestinely on the business, when it has the ability to spy and know everything the business is doing, and then the ability to prosecute and fine and disable that business. It's just amazing what we put up with. Anyway, Holliday held an emergency meeting of his ministers and army commanders after revelations that the NSA had spied on the last 3 French presidents. Yep. And of course, you know, John McClown of Arizona would protest, as would so many in the U.S. government, that the problem here isn't that the NSA is spying on allies and spying on businesses, foreign businesses even. It's not that the NSA is, according to them, ignoring the U.S. Constitution, in fact violating it, and seizing information without due process, unreasonable search and seizure in this case. No, they would blame Edward Snowden for making their ridiculousness known. Yes, they would blame the whistleblower for exposing their behavior. You know, I have a suggestion to those who would do that. Don't act badly, and you won't be embarrassed when someone with a conscience actually exposes your misdeeds. Well, nonetheless, the United States is once again embarrassed in the world's eyes. It says France will not tolerate such actions that threaten its security and the protection of its interest. A statement from the president's office said it was not the first time that the allegations of U.S. spying on French interests had surfaced. Meanwhile, we are fixated with symbols. The governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia said that he was agreeing with the governor of North Carolina, and these 2 former Confederate states are now saying that they will ban the stars and bars, the Confederate flag, that it's a symbol of hate and that it has no place because it divides people. Well, you know, as an individual who lives in the South, the insignia that I think speaks hate and divides people is the American flag that flies over those same state houses. You see, those states decided that they didn't want to be part of the Union. It's supposed to be, you know, a republic. You're supposed to be able to vote. The people were empowered to decide. And yet when they voted to secede from the Union, the government out of Washington, bearing that flag, went to war with them. 600,000 people died because of that other flag, the one that you can still proudly fly. 600,000 men and women, boys and girls, died because of that other flag. And yet the flag that simply wanted to be free, that's the flag we ought to oppose. Oh, I know that there are those of you who might say, no, that's not fair, that's not a fair assessment. The other flag flies for freedom. And that bars and stars fly, that flag, that flies for slavery. No, neither of those things are true. No, you're not free in this country. Privacy is violated routinely. You can be incarcerated because you don't want to give the government the money it's using, not only to spy on you, but go and invade and break other countries. You aren't free. Violate a law and see what happens to you. Oppose the law that you violate and see if that matters. No, you're not free. And the states that voted to separate from the Union, they were not free either. That other flag, it imposed its will. When you impose will and you don't accept the will of others, they're not free. And you're not an advocate of freedom. Moreover, Lincoln was a racist, and not only was Lincoln a racist, Lincoln didn't liberate any slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation was way down the line in that war, and he didn't emancipate any slave in the North. He simply emancipated slaves in the place where he had no control, where he had absolutely no authority in the South. There wasn't a single slave emancipated because of his proclamation. Slavery would not exist, would not have continued to exist for very much longer. It didn't need a war to resolve. Slavery is a really unproductive, beyond all the negative associations with slavery, and everything associated with slavery is reprehensible. That's why I'm so opposed to Islam. Islam is all about slavery. And so I'm wholly opposed to slavery, but slavery would have ceased to exist just because it's not economically viable. It was a means originally of keeping people alive rather than killing them after conflicts to provide labor, and that they were of slightly more utility alive than they were dead. That's how Islam spread. It sold slaves, and finally when it sold more slaves than people could acquire, could afford, then it just massacred people and rewarded the conquerors with the ability to rape and plunder. But in the case of slaves, there are so many vastly superior ways of getting the necessary labor. With a slave, this person that has been kept alive as opposed to killed as part of a conquest still has to be trained. They still have to be housed. They still have to be clothed. They still have to be fed. And then you have to have all sorts of means of demanding that people work against their will and that they stay put against their will. And when you put all the costs associated with that together, it's economically undesirable. So we are once again being conditioned. You can't fly the flag of the Confederacy because, well, that other flag, it pulverized the South into submission. It terrorized the South with Sherman's March to the Sea. It started a war that 650,000 Americans sacrificed their lives for nothing. It was the one that imposed tyranny. You can't exercise your right to freedom. And yet the flag of the terrorist side, the flag of the side that decided to go to war to impose its will, that flag you can fly because it's the flag of unity and of peace and of love. But the flag, and that's the flag, by the way, that was flown when we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, and when it's a flag on the side of the airplanes that bomb Syria and Libya, making bad situations worse. It's the flag on the side of the drones that have killed so many in Pakistan and Yemen, making those situations worse. So you can fly that flag because it's not divisive.
Killing civilians. And they've killed many civilians with their drones. We don't know if they've actually hit any targets.
I don't think we've ever killed somebody, and it was part of a military with our drones. I think 100% of the killings have been civilians.
I haven't. It'd be something I'd be interested to find out.
So when Terry McAuliffe, the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, was talking about that there have been killings under the sign of that flag, boy, would you like to compare the number of killings under the sign of that other flag, the one of the United States of America? Let's say that there have been in the last 100 years 100 people killed under the bars and stars. Let's say there have been. How many hundreds of thousands have died from implements of war that have flown that other flag, the one of the United States of America. I mean, it's got to be many thousands to one, and yet one is presented as hateful and the other one is presented as compassionate and loving. Boy,
is this the
we've lost our way.
Confederate flag that people such as Obama and Hillary have both used in political campaigns? 2012, there's an Obama button. There's another Hillary one. So, I mean, what is it? Is it bad, or is it something that, you know?
Well, it became, what's interesting, too, is this became bad at all at one time. We've got 3 states, all of which collectively, within 24 hours of each other, all made these announcements. And then you had retailers like Amazon and Sears and eBay and Walmart all deciding during that exact same period of time to pull all merchandise with the stars and bars. And so the Civil War era flag of the South is no longer available. You can't purchase it, can't have one because it's motivated by racial hatred. Well, no. I mean, think about this for a moment. The most ruthless, the most effective general, the drunkard for the North, Ulysses S. Grant, he was a slave owner. Robert E. Lee, the general that led the South, he was not.
He was actually against it. He was against it. He went with the South because that's where he was from. His state succeeded, and he said, "Yeah, I'm going to go to where all my friends and family live."
Right. I'm going to go protect my friends and family. Goodness. You told me that that there was the proof that Dylan Roof, I guess is how he pronounces his name, not that I care, he was using mind-altering drugs, and that the gun is not the reason that he is that he killed those people. It was the mind-altering drugs, and that's true. WorldNet has reported that Charleston church shooter Dylan Roof was a known drug user who was caught with a powerful mind-altering narcotic, which is called Suboxone, when apprehended by police on February 28th. During an incident. I don't know why this is an incident. Oh, I guess he had previously been arrested and then released, because February 28th, of course, a long time before he did this killing. You know that this narcotic, this Suboxone is sold by a large pharmaceutical company. In fact, they're showing a picture of it. It comes in a very, very nice pouch, professionally printed with professional graphics all over it. So this is not an illegal narcotic, but it is a mind-altering narcotic. Suboxone is used to treat addiction to opioid drugs such as heroin. Its adverse effects include anxiety, irritability, depersonalization, confusion. We'll be back. Glenn's on the line. Glenn has called to talk about the flag issue, the stars and bars that represented the Confederacy during what's called a Civil War. I don't know why they call it a Civil War. Glenn, perhaps you do. You know, there was certainly nothing civil about it. What do you think about the old stars and bars?
Well, I would suggest that anything having to do with nation, state, regional, or cultural identity it has to be subjugated to, one's sense of being a good global citizen. Provinciality is forbidden. All other identifications must be given up. Chaos must be induced so that the old order must go, so that the new order can be handed down as a universal mandate to all humankind.
Yeah, well, your diatribe there happens to be accurate. That's exactly why they're banning the stars and bars for total uniformity, and people have to be reconditioned to give up any individuality and accept the politically correct norm. It's all true. My issue really is just an hypocrisy of the whole thing. To call the stars and bars hateful and inspiring violence when the other flag is the one that imposed its will, that usurped the rights and freedoms of the Southerners to impose its will. It led to a war that killed 650,000 men and women, and that has subsequently been the most deadly nation on earth. So I just don't like the hypocrisy of the whole thing.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree. But they will eventually. They have in the past beaten up on the Stars and Stripes, and they will, inevitably in the long run, subject that nation-state identification to globalism too.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's going to happen. In fact, there's no question that's going to happen. One of the things that Scott and I were talking about during the break is that Robert E. Lee, who I mentioned earlier, Robert E. Lee's home was in Arlington. In fact, the Arlington National Cemetery was stolen by the federal government, which was his home, initially as a graveyard and war memorial to the Northerners who killed Southerners. Died trying to kill Robert E. Lee. And so Robert E. Lee was, the top-ranking general in the U.S. military. He was a West Point graduate. And this government now came to him and said, oh, by the way, we're going to go to war to keep Virginia and these other states from choosing their own destiny, their own path. So we're going to go to war. You're a Virginian. The capabilities of your friends and your neighbors, your family. We want you, therefore, to lead this war of northern aggression against your own people, your neighbors, your family. What do you think about that, Robert?
He strikes me as sort of a Patton of his day, and having something, of a sense of honor as an officer and a gentleman, a rare thing. He wasn't willing to betray his own.
No, he wasn't. And a really extraordinary individual. It's kind of like MacArthur in a way. MacArthur fought in the opposite way that, for example, Lee and Ulysses S. Grant were the opposite. Lee wanted to minimize his casualties, and he only sought for a military objective to defend the South, and never wanted to put his troops needlessly in harm's way. In fact, it was only the one battle where he was sick and he didn't have Stonewall Jackson anymore that he made the horrendous decision to charge up a hill as opposed to taking the high ground and letting the enemy sacrifice themselves as opposed to sacrificing his troops. Ulysses S. Grant was exactly the opposite, a drunkard without a conscience. He was willing to sacrifice as many boys and girls as was required because he knew he had more than the South did, and that if they lost every battle, where they lost 100,000 in the battle and the South lost 25,000 in the battle, that the North would win. And so he fought that.
A total disregard.
And Ulysses S. Grant is on our currency, and Robert E. Lee is.
Well, you mentioned Sherman. You mentioned Sherman too. He was the devil incarnate. He's the one who opted for a total war strategy, and then his march to the sea, burning, with his, burned everything as he went,
Right.
And there's a phrase I'm groping for there, but can't get. And then, of course, Lincoln presided over all this approvingly. So.
Right, and it's in Lincoln's issue. A lot of people think it was fought over slavery because when Lincoln was elected over Douglas, that the South didn't want Lincoln because he would not accept an equal number of slave and non-slave states, and that was not the issue, because Lincoln in the Lincoln-Douglas debates said that blacks should never be allowed to vote. They should never be given citizenry. They're wholly incompetent. I mean, his racist statements they make you cringe. And that what he wanted was, rather than having states where blacks could live, he wanted them put in concentration camps. He wanted a vastly more draconian version of the Indian reservation, where they would be taken and put in concentration camps so they could not coexist with whites. That was his strategy. And so this notion that, you know, he should have this great memorial and we should look fondly upon Lincoln as the great orator and the great uniter. It's just repulsive how we've rewritten history to create these myths that are so just disgusting.
Yeah, and it says something that Karl Marx sent Lincoln a letter of congratulations at the end of the Civil War. That, you know, when many of the people we lionize aren't worthy of the praise, and many of the people we demonize aren't as evil as we're told. So, you know,
yes, that is true.
There's been some vestige of remembrance of the Civil War as late as the 70s, I recall, because you even had the old Joan Baez song, right? They drove Old Dixie down. You know, there was more of a cultural conscious identity feeling the South about that back then. It's pretty much gone now.
Yeah. You know, this story of Dylan Roof, Suboxone is a prescription drug. It is a prescription drug. He was on the prescription drug. This prescription drug is known to create the following effects: anxiety, irritability, depersonalization, confusion, suicidal thoughts, irrational behavior, and violent behavior. Those are its side effects.
Wow, perfect NJ12 type stuff, you know?
Yeah. So if you want to blame something, would you blame the gun or would you blame this narcotic? Which is, you know, this narcotic is produced legally.
They won't discuss the drugs.
It's prescribed by doctors.
Yeah. They won't discuss the drugs. They always blame the guns. They will not talk about drugs. I meant to say MK Ultra, not MJ12, I guess. But it's
revolting here again.
Yeah,
I mean, whoever prescribed that drug should be an accomplice. Now, I understand that this kid may have been on heroin, and if he was on heroin, you know, what the hell's wrong with He's 21 years old. What the hell's wrong with his father? But let's say that he was on heroin, and they were treating him for heroin. And I don't know if he was a heroin addict or not, but this drug is prescribed to those on heroin. One of the problems that we have is this non-disclosure of information. By protecting the rights of abusers, we make non-abusers vulnerable. So the lawmakers who pass the laws such that somebody on a drug like this, that the fact that they're taking the drug is unknowable. That should be a crime. I mean, it should be a crime that they pass such laws. Because if you're going to be prescribed a drug that they know the side effects are depersonalization, confusion, violence, and irrational behavior, and irritability, shouldn't that person be confined while they're taking that drug?
Yeah, well, then, of course, it's a matter of statistics as to how prevalent each of the side effects is. But did you see the kid's eyes? Did you see that guy's eyes? You didn't need a disclosure to tell he was on something powerful. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But if you're going to take a mind-altering drug, and this is a mind-altering drug, you ought not be able to take a mind-altering drug without disclosure to others, without some identification that you're on this, without some kind of surveillance, and protecting the public. Man, I tell you what, I'd rather deal with somebody with a MR16 than I would deal with somebody on a mind-altering drug like this, because you can at least attempt to reason with one. You can't reason with the other.
Got a severe numerical enforcement problem there, because the number of people out on the street who are on, psychotropic drugs far exceeds the number of people who are in institutions, and the number of people untreated on the street far dwarfs them. Yeah, so.
Yes, but I'm not sure the treatment is beneficial. If the treatment on these mind-altering drugs was beneficial, then of the 600,000 Americans on post-traumatic stress disorder treatment, you wouldn't have some 80 of them a day taking their own lives.
Well, it's very odd. I mean, the vast majority of people who used to be in psychiatric institutions used to be schizophrenics. And that, of course, has changed over time as things like depression and SSRIs and stuff, and bipolar, mood disorders and personality disorders become more prevalent. psychosis of schizophrenia. And I used to dispense this stuff in psychiatric units and stuff. And you'd see the problem of, there's also the problem of recidivism. You get, somebody who might get doing better and then get discharged, and if they're not, if they start back on street drugs and don't do the prescription drugs or don't have family, support and stuff, you've got the revolving door frequent flyer thing going on too. So even if the drugs do help, there's the issue of these issues on top of it.
Yeah, and this article by WorldNet Daily is talking about the fact that of the 62 mass shootings that were carried out in the United States over the period of 1982 to 2012, during that period of time there were 62 mass shootings. 41 of the shooters were mentally ill. Now, there's a difference between being mentally handicapped, mentally retarded, and mentally ill. I think that mainstreaming the mentally retarded, the mentally handicapped, is a extraordinarily appropriate thing to do. But we made a decision as a nation that we would try to mainstream the psychotic, those who had mental illness. And we were to treat them very privately with all manner of drugs. And now what you're finding is that the common denominator of all of the mass shootings is not the gun, it's mental illness and the drugs prescribed for it. When I'm reading about some of these mass school shooters, you probably recall the name Adam Lanza, although they didn't say much about the kid's name. You, I'm sure, know about Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newton, Connecticut. Well, the 20-year-old who shot 20 students and 6 adults at Sandy Hook, his name is Adam Lanza. Did he, about the guns, of course, that he had, because that's what made the news, that's what everybody wanted to talk about. But guess what they didn't want to talk about? That he had been prescribed several psychiatric drugs, including Fanapt, a controversial antipsychotic medicine. Fanapt is one of many drugs the FDA pumped out with the ability to extract the opposite desired effect on people. That is, inducing rather than inhibiting psychosis and aggressive behavior, Business Insider reported. Now, I'm not sure that the FDA had a clandestine motive. That doesn't sound reasonable to me, or rational to me. But Fanapt did have the side effect that it made people more aggressive, and it exacerbated, in many cases, psychosis.
Right. Well,
I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of the kid.
Paradoxical effect. Like, Ritalin is a stimulant for adults, but in children
right.
It has a paradoxical effect, a calming effect in kids. And then a lot of times drugs will have as side effects, the very thing that they're trying to treat if, it doesn't work for that person's body chemistry or whatever, But, and you're seeing these other drugs.
Remember the,
like they were on our eyes.
Yeah.
Okay.
This other guy, you see the Navy Yard shooter, his name was Aaron Alexis, sprayed bullets everywhere. He had been prescribed trazodone, or trazodone, I guess is how it's pronounced, trazodone. Yeah, by his military affairs doctor. So the military was prescribing that, I guess, for post-traumatic stress disorder. Remember the Aurora movie theater, James Holmes, who wore the clownish orange-red hair? Well, his psychiatrist, Dr. Len Fenton, told officers that Holmes had stopped seeing her and had been threatening her in text messages and email documents. But, of course, she didn't reveal that information. The officer, Len Whitten, responded by deactivating Holmes' key card access to secure areas of the University of Colorado medical campus buildings. Police found medications in his apartment, including sedatives and anti-anxiety drug that was clonazepam. Clonazepam, the C-L-O-N-A-Z-E-P-A-M. Yeah, close. Yeah. Also found the antidepressant sertraline, a generic version of Zoloft. You just go down the list. All of the big ones. I mean, every single one. They were receiving psychiatric treatment, and they were on psychiatric drugs.
Well, when I started college in 1978, I remember when I first read a big article in Time magazine about neurotransmitters. These look this research into neurotransmitters in the brain, and everything, from tryptophan, as a supplement for serotonin and stuff like that, and then things having to do with sleep and dopamine and all. So that was, beginning of the era of this emphasis on neurotransmitters. And what we have now
we came up with the idea that we had chemical imbalances, and that these mental disorders were results of chemical imbalances, and let's just feed the chemical in there, and let's see how that works.
Oh yeah, and they're playing. I remember speaking to the person who purchased my grandparents' house was a researcher at a major university here in Philadelphia, and having to do with neurotransmitters. And I remember him telling me that it was, what he found troubling was that the brain is very specific in its chemistry, and our efforts in affecting it were very generalized. In other words, we need to be using a rifle, and we were using shotguns.
Yes, or even worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you look at the fact that I have a friend that runs a private pharmacy. He's not a lot of those anymore. And he would talk about the kinds of drugs that he distributes. And in this pharmacy, he'd say, we'd bring in small little bottles of antibiotics and all the other kinds of drugs. But when it came to the mind-altering drugs, the painkillers and the psychiatric drugs, he said, we brought those in barrels.